The space station looked like something from a dream. Captain Ryan stood perfectly still in the long hallway, his boots planted firmly on the shiny metal floor. He had been a soldier for 10 years, but today felt different. Today wasn't about fighting. Today was about survival. The walls around him were made of some kind of crystal that seemed to glow from within. Everything was so clean and bright that it hurt his eyes. Back on Earth, buildings were made of concrete and steel. Here, everything looked like it was grown. Rather than built, the air smelled different too, sweet and clean, like nothing he had ever breathed before. Ryan adjusted his armor one more time. The metal plates were heavy on his shoulders, but he was used to that weight. Each dent and scratch told a story. There was the burn mark from the attack on Mars colony, the deep gouge from when those spider-like creatures had tried to tear him apart on Europa, and the newest damage from the battle at the asteroid belt, where humanity had barely escaped complete destruction. He wasn't alone in the hallway. Behind him stood Ambassador Collins, a woman who had spent her entire life learning how to talk to people. She carried a simple briefcase, but inside were documents that could change everything. Next to her was Dr. Peterson, the smartest person Ryan had ever met. The old man's hand shook slightly as he held his tablet, probably running calculations in his head about their chances of success. For months, they had prepared for this moment. Every possible question had been rehearsed. Every diplomatic response had been practiced until it was perfect. The fate of 8 billion people rested on how well they could convince a roomful of aliens that humans deserved to exist. The truth was simple and terrifying. Earth was dying. The oceans were rising, the air was getting thicker, and the sun seemed to burn hotter every year. The colonies on Mars and the Moon were barely hanging on, dependent on supplies from the homeworld. Without help from the advanced alien races, humanity had maybe 50 years left before everything collapsed. But getting that help meant joining something called the Galactic Council. And joining the council meant proving that humans were worth saving. Ryan had read the files. He knew what they were up against. The aliens in the council had been traveling between stars for thousands of years, while humans were still learning to make fire. They had technologies that could terraform dead worlds, cure any disease, and create energy from nothing. To them, humans were like children playing with dangerous toys. The worst part was that the aliens weren't wrong. In the past 100 years, humans had fought 3 major wars that nearly destroyed the planet. They had created weapons that could kill millions in seconds. They had poisoned their own air and water while fighting over resources. From the outside, humanity looked like a species that couldn't be trusted with anything important. A soft chime echoed through the hallway. Ryan's heart started beating faster. The alien delegation was arriving. First came the guards, if you could call them that. They looked like living shadows, moving without making any sound. Their job was to protect the important aliens, but they moved with such grace that they seemed to float rather than walk. Ryan had seen combat robots before, but these creatures were something else entirely. Then came the advisors. Tall, thin beings with skin that changed color like oil on water. They whispered to each other in languages that sounded like music. Mixed with mathematics, each one probably knew more about science and technology than every human scientist combined. Finally, she appeared. Princess Lyra was 19 years old, but she moved like someone who had been born to rule. Her skin had a slight glow to it, shifting between blue and silver as she walked. Her hair seemed to be made of starlight, moving in ways that defied gravity. But it was her eyes that caught Ryan's attention. They were deep, violet, ancient, and knowing, as if she had seen the rise and fall of civilizations. She wore robes that seemed to be cut from the fabric of space itself, decorated with patterns that hurt to look at directly. Everything about her screamed power and authority. This was someone who had never been told no, never been denied anything she wanted. The princess looked around the hallway like a queen surveying her kingdom. Her gaze swept over the human delegation, and Ryan could see the judgment in her eyes. To her, they were insects that had somehow learned to talk. Ambassador Collins stepped forward, her practiced smile never wavering. "Your Highness, on behalf of the people of Earth, I welcome you to these historic negotiations. The princess nodded slightly, the bare minimum of politeness. Ambassador, she said, her voice carrying the musical quality of her species. Let us proceed. I have other matters to attend to. Ryan felt a chill run down his spine. Da-da-da-da. In those few words, he could hear everything the princess thought about humanity. They were an inconvenience, a minor task to be completed before moving on to more important things. As they walked toward the negotiation chamber, Ryan caught glimpses of other alien species through the crystal walls.
Ow.
There were the crystalline, collective beings made of living glass who communicated through light patterns. The Voidwalkers, who existed partially in another dimension and appeared as shifting shadows. The Ancient Ones, so old that they had forgotten their original names, and were now known only by numbers. All of them were more advanced than humanity. All of them had earned their place in the galactic community through centuries of achievement, and all of them were about to sit in judgment of a species that had barely learned to leave its home, solar system. The negotiation chamber was enormous, with a ceiling that seemed to stretch up forever. The walls were transparent, showing the star field beyond. Earth was visible in the distance, a small blue dot that looked incredibly fragile. Against the vast darkness of space, Ryan took his position near the wall, where he could see everything but stay out of the way. His job was simple: protect the human delegation and try not to make humanity look any worse than it already did. But as Princess Lyra took her place, at the center of the chamber, Ryan had a feeling that today was going to be anything but simple. The negotiation chamber felt like a courtroom where humanity was on trial. Captain Ryan watched from his position against the wall as Ambassador Collins opened her briefcase and pulled out a stack of documents. These weren't just papers, they were humanity's resume, their application to join the most exclusive club in the galaxy. The ambassador's voice was steady as she began to speak. Honored members of the Galactic Council, we come before you today not as conquerors, but as learners. In the past century, humanity has made remarkable progress. She gestured to the holographic display that appeared in the center of the chamber. Images of human achievements began to cycle through: the first moon landing, the Mars colonies, the construction of the orbital cities around Jupiter. Each image was accompanied by statistics showing human population growth, technological advancement, and cultural development. We have eliminated poverty on 3 continents, the ambassador continued. We have cured diseases that once killed millions. We have built cities that float on the ocean and farms that grow food in the vacuum of space. Orion felt a small surge of pride. When you looked at it that way, humanity really had accomplished incredible things. From a species that used to hunt with stone tools to one that could terraform moons in just a few thousand years, that was pretty amazing. But Princess Lyra didn't look impressed. She sat in her chair like a judge watching a defendant make excuses. Her violet eyes moved across the holographic display with the same interest someone might show when watching paint dry. Occasionally, she would lean over and whisper something to one of her advisors, and they would both make that expression that meant they were trying not to laugh. The presentation continued for 20 minutes. Ambassador Collins showed charts of human population, growth, images of artistic achievements, recordings of human music and poetry. She talked about the human capacity for love, friendship, and sacrifice. She explained how humans had learned to work together, despite their differences. Finally, she reached the end of her prepared remarks. We believe that humanity can contribute to the galactic community in ways that will benefit all species. We ask for your consideration and your guidance as we take our first steps into the larger universe. The chamber fell silent. Ryan could hear his own heartbeat in his ears. Everything they had worked for, everything they had hoped for, hung in the balance. Princess Lyra stood up slowly. She was tall, maybe 6.5 feet, and when she rose to her full height, she seemed to fill the entire chamber. Her robes rustled like wind through alien trees, and the patterns on the fabric seemed to shift and change as she moved. Fascinating, she said, her voice carrying that musical quality that made even insults sound beautiful. Truly fascinating. She began to walk around the chamber, her footsteps making no sound on the crystal floor. As she moved, her gaze swept across the human delegation, like a predator examining potential prey. "You speak of achievements," she continued. "But I see only the struggles of a primitive species trying to catch up to civilizations that mastered these technologies. Millennia ago?" Ryan felt his stomach drop. This wasn't going well. The princess stopped in front of the holographic display and waved her hand. The images of human achievement disappeared, replaced by images of Zephyrian cities. The comparison was devastating. Where human cities looked like collections of metal and glass boxes, Zephyrian cities looked like living works of art that grew from the landscape itself. "Your fastest ship," she said, "takes 6 months to travel between your closest colonies. Our children's toys move faster than that." She gestured again, and the display showed human medical technology, operating rooms, scanning equipment, robotic, surgical devices. Then it switched to show Zephyrian medical technology, which seemed to consist of a single, small device that could diagnose and cure any illness in seconds. "You celebrate curing diseases that our species eliminated so long ago that we have forgotten their names," the princess continued. "You take pride in feeding your population. When we learned to create food from pure energy before your species discovered agriculture." With each comparison, Ryan felt humanity shrinking. Everything they had accomplished, everything they were proud of, suddenly seemed like the achievements of children playing with toys. But the princess wasn't finished. She turned her attention to the human delegation itself, and her gaze settled on Dr. Peterson. The old scientist was trying to maintain his composure, but Ryan could see the sweat beading on his forehead. "Your chief scientist," she said, her voice dripping with amusement. "Tell me, doctor, what is your greatest discovery?" Dr. Peterson cleared his throat nervously. "Well, Your Highness, I developed the fusion drive system that powers our long-range spacecraft." The princess actually laughed. It was a sound like silver bells, but there was cruelty in it. "Fusion drive," she repeated. "How wonderfully primitive. We stopped using fusion power when we realized it was too slow and inefficient for anything more complex than heating soup." The other alien representatives began to murmur among themselves. Ryan could see them exchanging glances, and he didn't need to understand their languages to know what they were thinking. These humans were wasting everyone's time. But Princess Lyra wasn't done humiliating them. Her gaze moved to Ambassador Collins, and Ryan saw the diplomat's carefully maintained composure begin to crack. "Your diplomat speaks of love and friendship," the princess said. "How touching. But tell me, Ambassador, how many wars has your species fought in the past century? How many of your own kind have you killed in disputes over resources that we could create with a thought?" Ambassador Collins opened her mouth to respond, but the princess cut her off with a gesture. "I have read your history," she continued. "Your species has been at war with itself for its entire existence. You've poisoned your own planet, destroyed your own ecosystems, and driven countless other species to extinction. And now, when you face the consequences of your own actions, you come to us asking for help." The chamber was dead silent now. Even the other alien representatives had stopped their murmuring. Ryan could feel the weight of their judgment pressing down on the human delegation like a physical force. And then Princess Lyra's gaze fell on him. "And this," she said, her voice carrying a note of pure contempt, "is your finest warrior?" Ryan felt every eye in the chamber turn toward him. His armor suddenly felt incredibly heavy, like it was made of lead instead of titanium. The scars and dents that had once seemed like badges of honor now felt like marks of shame. The princess began to circle him, the way a scientist might examine an interesting specimen. "Look at him," she said to her advisors. "He stands there in his battered armor, trying to look impressive, but I can see the fear in his eyes." Ryan's jaw tightened, but he forced himself to remain still. He had faced down alien monsters, survived explosions that had killed his friends, and stood guard over humanity's most important secrets. But somehow, the words of this 19-year-old princess cut deeper than any weapon ever had. "Hey, this is what humanity sends to represent them," she continued. "A soldier who looks like he's playing dress-up in equipment his civilization can barely understand." The princess stopped directly in front of him, so close that he could see the patterns of light that moved beneath her skin. "Tell me, warrior," she said, her voice soft but deadly, What battles have you won? What enemies have you defeated that we should be impressed by your presence? Ryan wanted to tell her about the siege of Mars colony, where he had held off an entire alien invasion force for 3 days. He wanted to tell her about the rescue mission to Europa, where he had saved 200 colonists from creatures that could tear through steel with their bare claws. He wanted to tell her about the countless times he had put his life on the line to protect people who couldn't protect themselves. But looking into those ancient violet eyes, he realized that none of it mattered. To her, his greatest achievements were nothing more than the struggles of an insect trying to survive in a world it didn't understand. "I see," she said, when he didn't answer. "A warrior with no victories worth mentioning." She turned away from him and addressed the entire chamber. "Honored colleagues, I believe we have seen enough. How can we consider granting membership to a species that sends such inadequate representatives?" The word hit Ryan like a physical blow. Inadequate. After everything he had done, everything he had sacrificed, everything he had survived, he was inadequate. Ambassador Collins tried to salvage the situation. "Your Highness, perhaps we could discuss the specific terms of membership." "There will be no terms," the princess interrupted. "There will be no membership. There will be no place for humanity in the galactic community until you can prove that you are something more than the primitive, violent species you appear to be." She gestured toward Ryan with obvious disgust. "Remove this pretender from my sight. His very presence diminishes the dignity of these proceedings." The words hung in the air like a death sentence. Ryan could see the months of preparation crumbling around him. He could see the hope dying in Ambassador Collins' eyes. Could see the future of humanity slipping away because of his inadequacy. The silence in the chamber was deafening. Captain Ryan could hear his own breathing inside his helmet, each breath echoing like thunder in his ears. The word inadequate kept repeating in his mind like a broken record. Every alien in the room was staring at him, waiting to see what the primitive human would do next. His fellow soldiers were tense, their hands moving instinctively toward their weapons. Lieutenant Davis had taken a half-step forward, his face red with anger. Sergeant Thompson's jaw was clenched so tight that Ryan could see the muscles in his neck standing out like cords. They were good soldiers, loyal friends, and they were ready to fight for their captain's honor. But Ryan knew that fighting would only prove the princess right. Violence was exactly what she expected from humanity. It was what everyone in this room expected. The savage humans, unable to control their emotions, unable to handle criticism, resorting to force when their feelings got hurt. Ambassador Collins was trying to salvage the situation, her diplomatic training kicking in despite the disaster unfolding around her. "Your Highness, perhaps we could take a brief recess too." "There will be no recess." Princess Lyra interrupted, her voice cutting through the air like a blade. "I have made my decision. This pretender and his primitive delegation should return to their dying world and prepare for the inevitable." The princess turned away from Ryan as if he had already ceased to exist. She began walking toward her advisors, probably to discuss the next item on her agenda. To her, humanity was finished, dismissed, forgotten. And that's when something inside Ryan snapped. Not into anger, like everyone expected. Not into violence, like the princess probably hoped. Instead, something deeper broke free. A clarity he had never experienced before. In that moment, he understood exactly what he needed to do. Ryan reached up and began to remove his helmet. The motion was so unexpected that conversation around the chamber stopped. Princess Lyra paused mid-step, turning back to see what was happening. The other aliens watched with curious expressions, probably wondering if the human was about to do something embarrassing. The helmet came off with a soft hiss of escaping air. Ryan set it down on the floor beside him, the metallic clang echoing through the chamber. His brown hair was matted with sweat, and there were pressure marks on his face from where the helmet had rested. Without the armor's enhancement, his voice sounded smaller, more human. "You're absolutely right," he said, his words carrying clearly through the chamber. Princess Lyra's eyes widened slightly. This wasn't the response she had expected. Ryan continued removing his armor, piece by piece. The shoulder guards came off first, revealing the simple fabric underneath. Then the chest plate, scarred and dented from a dozen battles. Each piece hit the floor with a sound like a bell tolling. "I am inadequate," Ryan said as he worked. "Completely, totally inadequate." The gauntlets came off next. His hands looked pale and fragile without the armored gloves. The alien technology around him could probably read his genetic code, predict his thoughts, and calculate his life expectancy down to the second. His bare hands couldn't do any of those things. "I'm inadequate compared to someone who was born with the accumulated knowledge of 1,000 generations," he continued, pulling off his arm guards. "I'm inadequate compared to someone who grew up with technology that can reshape matter at the molecular level." The princess was watching him now with complete attention. Her advisors had stopped their whispering. Even the other alien representatives had turned to observe this strange human behavior. "I'm inadequate compared to someone who has never known hunger, never known fear, never known what it's like to watch friends die because your medical technology isn't advanced enough to save them." The leg armor came off, leaving Ryan in simple military fatigues that looked pathetic compared to the flowing robes and advanced materials worn by everyone else in the chamber. He stood there, smaller now, more vulnerable, but somehow more present than he had been in full armor. "You want to know what battles I've won?" Ryan asked, looking directly at Princess Lyra. "I've won the battle against despair when our colony ships were failing and people were dying in the void between stars. I've won the battle against hatred when alien species attacked us and killed our people, and we chose to seek peace instead of revenge." He gestured toward Ambassador Collins, who was watching him with a mixture of horror and fascination. "I've won the battle against ignorance by protecting diplomats who taught me that words can be more powerful than weapons. I've won the battle against selfishness by risking my life for people I've never met, on worlds I'll never see again." Princess Lyra's expression had changed. The smug satisfaction was gone, replaced by something Ryan couldn't quite identify. Confusion, maybe. Or perhaps the first stirring of genuine curiosity. "But you're right about one thing," Ryan continued. "I am playing dress-up." He gestured toward the armor scattered on the floor. "This armor belonged to my father, and his father before him. 3 generations of soldiers who never lived to see their children grow up because they were too busy fighting wars that didn't need to be fought." The chamber was completely silent now. Every being in the room was focused on this one human, standing in his simple clothes, speaking truth with a quiet dignity that no amount of advanced technology could replicate. "My grandfather died fighting against the Proxima rebels, convinced that violence was the only way to solve problems. My father died defending the outer colonies, still believing that the strong should protect the weak through force. And here I am, wearing their armor, following their path, proving that humans never learn." Ryan picked up his helmet and held it in his hands, looking at his reflection in the polished surface. But maybe that's the point. Maybe being inadequate isn't a weakness. Maybe it's what makes us human. He looked up at Princess Lyra again, and this time there was no deference in his gaze. He was speaking to her as an equal, not as a subject begging for favor. "You've never failed at anything, have you?" he asked. "You've never had to struggle, never had to doubt yourself, never had to wonder if you were good enough. You were born perfect, raised perfect, and you'll probably die perfect." The princess opened her mouth to speak, but Ryan wasn't finished. "That's not inadequacy speaking," he said. "That's honesty. And maybe that's what humanity brings to your perfect galactic community. The ability to fail, to struggle, to keep trying, even when we know we're not good enough." He began walking toward the scattered pieces of his armor, but instead of putting them back on, he gathered them up in his arms. "We're not advanced enough to create matter from energy. We're not wise enough to avoid making mistakes. We're not strong enough to protect everyone we care about." Ryan straightened up, holding his father's armor like a burden he had carried for too long. "But we're stubborn enough to keep trying anyway. We're foolish enough to believe that tomorrow can be better than today. We're brave enough to stand in front of beings who could destroy us with a thought and ask for a chance to prove ourselves." He turned toward the chamber exit, his footsteps echoing in the silence. "When you're ready to meet humanity as we are instead of as you think we should be, you know where to find us." Princess Lyra's voice stopped him at the threshold. "Where are you going?" For the first time since she had entered the chamber, she sounded uncertain. Ryan paused without turning around. "Home," he said simply. "Build ships that can cross the void between stars, where primitive minds find solutions to problems that would challenge any species, where weak hearts carry the hope of an entire civilization." He stepped toward the door, then stopped one more time. "And Your Highness, the next time someone takes off their armor in front of you, you might want to ask yourself why they felt safe enough to do it." With that, Captain Ryan walked out of the chamber, leaving behind a room full of the most powerful beings in the galaxy, all of them wondering what had just happened to their perfect, predictable universe. Captain Ryan's footsteps echoed through the crystal hallways of the space station like a countdown to humanity's doom. Each step took him further away from the negotiation chamber, further away from humanity's last hope, and further away from the future his species desperately needed. Behind him, the chamber had erupted into chaos. Ambassador Collins stood frozen at the negotiation table, her carefully prepared documents scattered like autumn leaves. Her mouth was slightly open, as if she wanted to call Ryan back, but couldn't find the words. 20 years of diplomatic training had taught her how to handle every possible scenario except this one. No manual had prepared her for watching humanity's representative walk away from the most important meeting in human history. Dr. Peterson was frantically tapping on his tablet, probably calculating the odds of humanity's survival without galactic assistance. The numbers weren't good. Without access to alien technology, Earth had maybe 50 years before complete environmental collapse. The colonies would last a bit longer, but not much. The old scientist's face had gone pale as he watched their last chance disappearing down the hallway. Lieutenant Davis and Sergeant Thompson were caught between their duty to protect the delegation and their loyalty to their captain. Davis had actually taken a step toward the door, his hand reaching for his weapon, before Thompson grabbed his arm. They both knew that following Ryan would mean abandoning the mission, but letting him go alone felt like betrayal. The real shock was happening among the alien representatives. The crystalline collective began flashing patterns of light so rapidly that their translators couldn't keep up. They communicated through color and brightness, and right now, they were practically throbbing with confusion. In their thousands of years of existence, they had never seen a representative simply walk away from negotiations. The Voidwalkers, normally as still as shadows, were shifting and moving like smoke in a windstorm. Their species existed partially in another dimension, which gave them perspectives that most beings couldn't understand. But even they seemed baffled by what they had just witnessed. The ancient ones, who had lived so long that they rarely showed emotion about anything, were actually leaning forward in their seats. One of them, a being so old that his name was just a number in a forgotten language, was making a sound that might have been laughter or might have been something else entirely. And then there was Princess Lyra. She stood in the center of the chamber like a statue, her violet eyes fixed on the doorway where Ryan had disappeared. For the first time in her 19 years of life, someone had rejected her, not just disagreed with her, not just argued with her, but completely dismissed her authority and walked away. Her advisors were clustering around her, speaking in hushed tones in their musical language. They were probably asking what she wanted to do next, whether they should call security, whether the negotiations should continue. But the princess wasn't listening to any of them. She was thinking about the human soldier's words, about how he had called himself inadequate and somehow made it sound like a virtue, about how he had stripped off his armor and made himself more powerful, not weaker, about how he had looked at her without fear, without worship, without the desperate need for approval that she was used to seeing in everyone's eyes. Meanwhile, Ryan continued his walk through the station's endless corridors. His arms were getting tired from carrying his father's armor, but he didn't want to put it down. The weight felt appropriate somehow, like he was carrying the burden of every human who had ever fought and died for something they believed in. The corridors were designed to impress visitors with the technological superiority of the Galactic Council. The walls showed holographic displays of member worlds, each one more beautiful and advanced than anything Earth could offer. There were cities that floated in the clouds of gas giants, underwater civilizations that had learned to breathe liquid methane, and space habitats that housed billions of beings in perfect harmony. Ryan had seen these displays when they first arrived, and they had made him feel small and insignificant. Now, walking past them with his armor in his arms, he felt something different. These civilizations were incredible, but they were also perfect. Imperfect things, he was beginning to realize, might not understand the value of imperfection. He passed a group of maintenance workers who stopped their tasks to stare at him. They were from a species he didn't recognize, with multiple arms and large compound eyes. They chattered among themselves in high-pitched voices, probably wondering why the human was carrying his own equipment instead of wearing it. A security patrol of those shadow-like guards drifted past him, and Ryan tensed for a moment, wondering if they were going to stop him. But they just observed him with their featureless faces and continued on their way. Apparently, leaving negotiations wasn't considered a security threat. It was probably considered evidence of mental instability. As Ryan walked, he thought about his father. Colonel Reynolds had been a hero in the Martian War, leading desperate battles against superior forces and somehow managing to win through sheer determination and tactical brilliance. He had worn this same armor through campaigns that had saved thousands of lives and secured humanity's foothold in the solar system. But his father had died believing that strength came from being invincible, that leadership meant never showing weakness, that success required being better than everyone else. Ryan had spent his entire military career trying to live up to that standard, trying to be worthy of wearing his father's armor. Now, for the first time, he was beginning to understand that maybe his father had been wrong about some things. The corridor opened into a vast observation deck that looked out onto space. Earth hung in the void like a blue marble, small and fragile, and heartbreakingly beautiful. From this distance, you couldn't see the pollution, or the rising oceans, or the dying forests. You could only see the world that had given birth to humanity, the world that had shaped them into the stubborn, imperfect, endlessly hopeful species they had become. Ryan set his armor down on a nearby bench and walked to the transparent wall. He pressed his palm against the cool surface and looked at his homeworld. Somewhere down there, 8 billion people were going about their lives, unaware that their future was being decided in a room full of aliens they had never seen. Those people were inadequate too. They'd made mistakes, they'd fought among themselves, they damaged their own planet through carelessness and greed. They were primitive compared to the beings in the Galactic Council, weak compared to species that could manipulate matter with their thoughts, ignorant compared to civilizations that had unlocked the secrets of the universe. But they were also capable of incredible things. They created art that could make you cry, music that could heal broken hearts, and stories that could inspire entire generations. They formed friendships that lasted lifetimes, fell in love despite impossible odds, and sacrificed everything for people they barely knew. They were human. And maybe Ryan thought, as he looked at his reflection in the observation window, that was enough. Behind him, he heard the soft sound of approaching footsteps. Not the heavy boots of his fellow soldiers, not the mechanical precision of security guards, but something lighter, something almost hesitant. He turned around and saw Princess Lyra standing at the entrance to the observation deck. She had come alone, without her advisors or guards. Her robe seemed dimmer somehow, less imposing in the starlight filtering through the transparent walls. She looked at him standing there without his armor, just a man in simple clothes looking at his home world. And for the first time since they had met, she seemed to see him as something other than a curiosity or an obstacle. "I've been thinking about what you said," she began, her voice lacking its earlier arrogance. "About inadequacy." Ryan didn't respond immediately, continued looking out at Earth, waiting to see what the most powerful young woman in the galaxy had come to tell him. "I have never failed at anything," she continued, moving closer to the observation window. "Never struggled, never doubted myself, never wondered if I was good enough. Just like you said." She stood beside him now, also looking out at the small blue world that had somehow produced this puzzling species. "And I realize now that maybe that's not something to be proud of." Ryan finally turned to look at her. Without the harsh lighting of the negotiation chamber, without the formal setting and the weight of ceremony, she looked different, younger, more uncertain, more human. "Why did you come here?" "He asked quietly. Princess Lyra was silent for a long moment, and when she spoke, her voice was almost too soft to hear. "Because I think you might be the first person who ever walked away from me," she said. "And I want to understand why." Captain Ryan looked at Princess Lyra standing beside him in the observation deck, and for the first time since they had met, he saw her as more than just the most powerful teenager in the galaxy. In the soft starlight filtering through the transparent walls, she looked like what she actually was, a young woman who had been given incredible responsibility, before she was old enough to understand what it meant. "You want to know why I walked away?" Ryan asked, his voice gentle. "Because staying would have meant pretending to be something I'm not, and I've spent my whole life pretending." The princess moved closer to the observation window, her gaze fixed on the small blue world spinning slowly in the void. "What were you pretending to be? Strong enough, smart enough, good enough?" Ryan gestured toward his armor, sitting on the nearby bench. "I've been wearing my father's armor for 10 years, trying to fill shoes that were never meant for me. Trying to be the kind of soldier who never shows weakness, never admits mistakes, never asks for help." Princess Lyra was quiet for a moment, and when she spoke, her voice carried a sadness that Ryan hadn't expected. "I understand pretending. Pretend to know everything, to have all the answers, to be worthy of the crown I'll inherit. But the truth is, I'm just as lost as anyone else." She turned away from the window to face him directly.
Oh, wait, when you removed
"Your armor in that chamber, when you admitted you were inadequate, you did something I've never been able to do. You told the truth about yourself." Ryan studied her face in the dim light. Without the harsh ceremonial lighting of the negotiation chamber, without the formal robes and the weight of ceremony, she looked remarkably ordinary. Her skin still had that otherworldly glow. Her eyes still held depths that spoke of advanced evolution. But there was something human in her expression now. "Can I tell you something?" she asked. "Something I've never told anyone?" Ryan nodded. "I'm terrified," she whispered. "Every single day. Terrified that I'll make the wrong decision and destroy everything my people have built. Terrified that I'll prove I'm not worthy of the power I've inherited. Terrified that everyone will discover I'm just a 19-year-old girl who has no idea what she's doing." The admission hung in the air between them like a bridge neither had expected to build. Ryan felt something shift in his chest, a recognition that crossed the vast distance between their species. "Your Highness," he said slowly, "may I ask you?" "Something, Lyra?" she said. "Just call me Lyra. And yes, you can ask me anything. Why did you really come to these negotiations? Not the official reason, but the real one." Lyra was silent for so long that Ryan thought she might not answer. When she finally spoke, her voice was barely above a whisper. "Because I wanted to. Prove I was ready to rule. Council of Elders thinks I'm too young, too inexperienced. They wanted to send my uncle to handle the human negotiations, but I insisted on coming myself." She laughed bitterly. "I thought dealing with a primitive eel species would be easy. It's a simple way to show everyone that I could handle diplomatic responsibilities." Ryan felt a strange mix of sympathy and amusement.
So we were your training wheels?"
"Yes," she admitted, her cheeks darkening with what might have been embarrassment. "And then you stood up in that chamber and showed more courage in 5 minutes than I've shown in 5 years of preparation for the throne." They stood together in comfortable silence. Two young people from different worlds who had discovered they weren't so different after all. Outside the observation deck, space stretched endlessly in all directions, filled with civilizations and wonders beyond imagination. But in this moment, the universe felt small enough for two people to understand each other. "Can I tell you about my father?" Ryan asked. Lyra nodded. "He was everything I'm not. Brave, confident, sure of himself. He fought in the Martian War and saved thousands of lives. Everyone said I was lucky to be his son, that I had big shoes to fill." Ryan picked up his helmet from where it sat with his armor and turned it over in his hands. "But I never wanted to fill his shoes. I just wanted to figure out how to walk in my own." "What would he think of what you did today?" Lyra asked. Ryan considered the question seriously. "I think he would have been furious at first," he believed. That showing weakness was the same as inviting defeat. Maybe, ... double quotes, thinking. Maybe he would have understood eventually. maybe he would have realized that sometimes the strongest thing you can do is admit you're not strong enough. Lyra reached out and touched the armor plating, running her fingers over the dents and scratches. These marks tell stories, don't they? Every single one. Ryan pointed to a deep gouge near the shoulder. That's from the Battle of Europa Station. A creature the size of a building tried to tear through our defensive line. We held them off. For 6 hours, until reinforcements arrived. He indicated a burn mark on the chest piece. That's from the Proxima raid. Our ship was hit and started venting atmosphere. I had to go outside and seal the breach while we were under fire. And this. Lyra pointed to a small, almost insignificant scratch near the heart. Ryan's expression grew soft. That's from a 7-year-old girl on Mars colony. She was trapped under debris after an earthquake, and I had to crawl through a collapsed building to reach her. She was so scared that she scratched my armor while I was carrying her out. Her name was Amy, and she drew me a picture afterward of me in my shiny suit. Lyra was quiet for a moment. You saved her life? She saved mine, Ryan replied. Every time I look at that scratch, I remember why I became a soldier. Not to win wars or prove how tough I am, but to protect people who can't protect themselves. The princess straightened up, and Ryan could see something changing in her expression. The uncertainty was still there, but it was being joined by something else. Determination, maybe, or understanding. Ryan, she said, and hearing his name in her musical voice felt strangely intimate. What if I told you that inadequacy might be exactly what the galaxy needs? I'd say you've been talking to the right human, Lyra smiled, and it was the first genuine smile he had seen from her. My people have been advanced for so long that we've forgotten what it's like to struggle. We've solved all our problems, eliminated all our challenges. We're perfect, and perfect things don't grow. She gestured toward Earth hanging in the void. But your species is still learning, still struggling, still making mistakes. You're not perfect, and that means you're still capable of becoming something better than you are. Ryan felt hope beginning to bloom in his chest. Are you saying? I'm saying that when we return to that chamber, things are going to be different? Lyra's voice carried a new authority, but it was tempered with the humility she had learned in the past hour. I'm going to recommend that the Council accept humanity as a probationary member. Not because you've proven you're perfect, but because you've proven you're capable of growth. She paused, looking out at the stars. And I'm going to recommend that we assign mentors to work with your people, not to control you or change you, but to help you develop your own solutions to the challenges you face. And in return, Ryan asked, in return, maybe you can teach us something we've forgotten. Maybe you can remind us what it's like to hope for something better, to work for something greater than ourselves, to find strength in admitting weakness. Ryan picked up his armor, but this time he didn't put it on. Instead, he held it in his arms like what it had become, not a burden to carry, but a reminder of where he had come from and how far he had traveled. Your Highness, Lyra, he corrected himself. She stood up straighter, and Ryan could see the future ruler emerging from the uncertain young woman. We go back to that chamber. You're going to put on your armor, not because you need it to be strong, but because it's part of who you are. I'm going to address the council, not as someone pretending to have all the answers, but as someone willing to learn. And humanity gets its chance, she said simply. It's not to prove they're perfect, but to prove they're worth believing in. As they walked back through the crystal corridors toward the negotiation chamber, Ryan felt different. The armor in his arms felt lighter, not because it weighed less, but because he was no longer carrying the weight of trying to be someone he wasn't. Behind them, Earth continued its slow rotation, a small blue world that had just earned its place. Among the stars, not through strength or perfection, but through the simple courage to be honest about its own inadequacy. And in the negotiation chamber ahead, the future was waiting to be written by two young people who had learned that sometimes the greatest strength comes from admitting you don't have all the answers.